Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're wading into some extraordinarily challenging and frankly radical source material.
Yeah,
And
that
it's a historical and theological investigation that really pushes back hard against conventional Christian understanding.
it does. And it focuses intensely on the claimed racial identity of Jesus, or, well, Yeshua, as the source consistently calls him.
Right, Yahshua.
And look, the sources we dug into are dense. They lean heavily, I mean really heavily, on very specific etymological interpretations. We're talking Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, Arabic scriptures.
Okay.
Their whole argument hinges on the idea that modern sort of standard translations, they've been intentionally twisted over centuries.
Got it. So let's just lay it out. Our goal here is to unpack the source's very specific argument that Jesus, Yeshua, and the original biblical figures, the patriarchs, were Nubian.
Meaning or dark-skinned in their framework.
Exactly. And that the image we typically see, the white Christ, isn't just inaccurate, it's a deliberate historical and cultural fabrication made to hide the truth.
That's the core assertion, yes.
Okay, so where do we even begin with that?
We have to start right in the absolute beginning with Adam, or Cadmon. That's the term the source uses for the first man.
The Hadmar.
And they argue Cadmon was inherently Nubian. This whole argument is built on, well, really specific linguistic evidence.
Right, so this isn't coming from, say, archaeology primarily. It's about word translations.
Precisely. How they translate keywords. They start with the creation story in the Quran, 15.28. It describes Adam's creation from Hama'in.
Hama-in. Okay, usually translated how.
Often, quite vaguely, molded clay, mud, something like that.
Yeah.
But this source, they translate Hama'in much more pointedly as black mud,
Black mud.
or even Hamite, black substance.
Wow, okay. That immediately connects the physical origin of humanity to, well, blackness.
Directly, and they don't stop there. They also look at the Hebrew word for man, or Adam. It comes from Adama.
Adama, yeah, meaning earth or ground, right?
Generally, yes. But they emphasize that Adama specifically means dark reddish-brown, or of the ground. And they connect that to the color of rich, dark, fertile topsoil.
Not just any ground, but dark ground.
Exactly. They firmly reject the idea that it just means, like, red clay.
But what about the common counter-argument? That Adama does relate specifically to red earth, not black soil. How does the source handle that?
Well, their explanation is that this dark reddish-brown describes the color of dark-skinned people when they get sunburnt, perhaps, or slightly oxidized. They maintain the original ground reference was to the black soil of the Nile Valley.
Ah, okay.
And then they explicitly link this whole heritage to the original people of Kemet. That's ancient Egypt and Pseudo-Nubia. They even point out that Nubia itself translates to the land of two blacks.
So it's a consistent thread for them. If Adam Cadmon was Nubian, the whole line follows.
That's the logic. So all the prophets, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, they were all Nubian according to this source.
Now, Ishmael's mother, Hagar, she was Egyptian, right? A Misraimite, so the source needs to account for her race, too.
They do. They argue that the original Misraimites, the Egyptians, were also Nubian.
How do they back that up?
They bring in some archaeological points, like the features on the pyramids and the Sphinx, but also etymology again. They stress that Kemite, or Kemet, the ancient name for Egypt, literally means burnt black.
Burnt black, okay. So it reinforces this racial identity for the entire region.
Exactly.
All right, let's shift focus now specifically to Jesus, Yahshua. The claim is he's a Nubian from the tribe of Judah. What's the genealogical evidence they use?
Okay, so they zoom right in on Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 17, the lineage of Christ.
The genealogy, yeah.
And they argue that including certain women, Tamar, Rahab, and Bathsheba, is absolutely crucial.
Why those women specifically?
Because, according to the source, biblical scholars historically identified these women as dark-skinned black people. So that establishes a dark-skinned foundation right in his immediate ancestry.
Interesting. And then there's that very practical point they make based on the story of the flight into Egypt.
Yes, that's a really powerful rhetorical point for them. You know the story, Matthew 2.1, the Holy Family flees Herod, goes into Egypt.
Right.
So the question the source basically puts to you, the listener, is this. How could a baby described as, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, thin-nosed, thin-lipped, pale-faced, just blend in and hide effectively among the people of Kemet?
Who they've already defined as dark-skinned black people.
Exactly. They argue the only way that child could possibly hide, evade Herod's soldiers, is if he looked like the local population, shared the same racial features.
It's a logical argument within their framework.
Yeah.
But they don't just rely on circumstance, right? They get very specific with biblical description.
Oh, yeah. They heavily rely on the visual description of Christ after the resurrection from the book of Revelation.
That's the big one for them.
It seems to be their definitive physical evidence.
Uh-huh.
Revelation 1, verses 14 and 15. It describes Christ's hair as white as wool,
White as wool.
and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace.
Okay, how do they interpret white as wool?
Not just the color white, but the texture, like aged, tightly coiled white hair, similar to wool's texture.
And the feet, fine brass, burned in a furnace.
They take that very literally as describing a complexion. Scorched, very dark, like bronze that's been superheated in a forge. A deep, dark bronze skin tone.
Very specific imagery. Now, before we move on, we absolutely have to address their critique of the name Jesus itself.
Yes, this is a major point for them. They argue really strongly against using the name Jesus.
Why?
They claim it's an intentional mistransliteration. They actually suggest the name Jesus was crafted to link the Messiah.
Jesus.
Yeah, to link him directly to Greek gods, specifically Tammuz and Zeus. Part of a deliberate push, they say, to Hellenize the faith, make it more Greek.
So what is the proper name, according to them?
Yahshua. They insist that's the original Aramaic name. And they emphasize that the name Jesus only became widespread centuries after his life.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, we have to tackle what might be the most unconventional part of this source material, the origins of Caucasians.
Right.
The source uses terms like pale man, Canaanites, or even flugel rods. We need to be really clear. We're just presenting the source's view here impartially.
Absolutely. And the source actually offers two completely separate, quite complex origin stories.
Two distinct theories. Okay, let's start with the one they derive from biblical reinterpretation, the curse of Canaan.
Okay, so the source takes the curse Noah put on Ham's fourth son, Laban, who they also identify as Canaan.
Right, usually seen as a curse of servitude.
Yes, but they argue it wasn't just about servitude, it was a specific genetic curse.
Genetic. How so?
They claim this curse literally resulted in the removal of melanin, all of it, causing albinism and also leprosy. They connect this to an Aramaic term, laba.
Laba, and that means...
According to them, it means white, and it also refers to leprosy.
So how does this genetic curse explain, the physical traits associated with Caucasian people today?
They point to Leviticus chapter 13, verses 4 and 30, where it describes leprosy signs like a bright spot be white in the skin,
Okay.
and also mentions yellow, blonde, thin, straight hair as part of confirming the condition. So their conclusion is that the Canaanites became the ancestors of the albino lepers,
Wow.
and that this genetic curse was predicted to manifest fully in the fourth generation, citing Exodus 20, verse 5.
That is an extremely polarizing interpretation, to put it mildly. How do they bridge the gap between something like leprosy, which we see as a disease, often temporary, and a permanent inherited change in racial appearance?
Well, the source essentially treats laba, this whiteness or leprosy, not as a temporary disease state, but as a permanent condition of depigmentation, like genetic albinism becoming a fixed racial trait, passed down through generations.
So that's how they frame the creation of pale-skinned people through divine, or rather cursed, means.
That's the first theory, yes, rooted in that specific interpretation of the curse.
Which brings us to the second origin story they present, which sounds even more speculative, the flugel rods.
Yes. This one is quite different. It suggests that the Aryan race, which they call flugel rods or Halibians, actually existed before the whole Canaanite curse thing.
Before? How long before?
They give a time frame of about 8,400 years ago.
And their creation. It wasn't divine or cursed?
No, according to this theory, it was. Well, scientific in a way. Attributed to someone they call a big-head scientist named Yaqub.
Yaqub. That name has specific connotations in certain circles. What was the mechanism Yaqub supposedly used, and why Hindus?
Right. The source claims Yaqub performed genetic splicing, or grafting. Apparently, he manipulated the genetics of the original dark-skinned people, using Hindus somehow as a baseline or component in the process.
Grafting. Like with plants.
Sort of, that's the analogy used. And the result, according to the source, was what they describe as a genetically weaker race.
Weaker how?
Characterized by things like a milky pale complexion, thin lips, straight hair, light eyes. And Yaqub's alleged motive, it was supposedly to create conflict, to give this new creation power to rule and eventually clash with the original people, setting up global strife.
Okay, those are certainly two very distinct and highly unconventional origin narratives presented by the source.
Definitely unconventional.
Moving on then to Jesus's or Yahshua's mission itself. The source is very forceful on this point. His mission was not universal. It was strictly tribal.
Exclusively for the Israelites. That's their hard line. They argue it was never meant for all nations, all people.
And they use scripture to back this up.
Oh yes, they argue the language is crystal clear. They quote Matthew 15.24 quite heavily, where Jesus says, "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel."
Pretty direct.
And they pair that with Matthew 10, verses 5 and 6. Jesus is instructing his disciples, "Go not into the way of the Gentiles, and into any city of the Samaritans enter ye not, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel."
So Gentiles and Samaritans explicitly excluded, go only to Israelites.
That's the mandate they highlight.
And this context heavily informs their interpretation of that famous story, the interaction with the Canaanite woman in Matthew 15.
Exactly. This passage becomes, for them, evidence of Jesus practicing a form of racial exclusion based on his specific mission.
Okay, walk us through their interpretation.
So the Canaanite woman comes asking for mercy for her daughter. Initially, Jesus just ignores her.
Right.
When she keeps persisting, he finally replies, saying it's not meet or right to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs.
Wow. He calls her and her people dogs. That's harsh.
Extremely harsh. And the source really hammers this point. They stress the specific Greek word used is kunari,
Kunariel.
which they say specifically means little dog, like a diminutive, but used in a highly derogatory, insulting way.
And their explanation for why he'd say that.
Their interpretation is blunt. He used that term because she was a Canaanite, descended from that cursed seed, according to their earlier theory, and his mission explicitly forbade him from helping non-Israelites, especially Canaanites.
That's a really challenging reading of that passage. What's their defense against the idea that maybe he was testing her faith, or that the term wasn't that harsh in context?
Their defense rests entirely on those verses we just mentioned, Matthew 10 and 15.24. They say those verses set the boundaries. Jesus was simply sticking to his divine orders.
So the fact that he does eventually heal her daughter, how do they explain that?
They point to Matthew 15.28. The healing is attributed directly and solely to the woman's great faith. It wasn't, in their view, Jesus changing his mind about his mission or suddenly deciding to help a Canaanite willingly. It was her faith that compelled the result.
Okay, so if the source claims all these biblical figures were originally Nubian, how did the white image of Christ become so dominant globally? They must explain that shift.
Oh, they do. They portray it as a massive, deliberate, centuries-long campaign, a whitewashing, as they call it.
Where did it start, according to them?
It really kicks off, in their narrative, with Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea back in 325 A.D.
Constantine making Christianity the state religion.
Exactly. But they argue he did more than that. He actively enforced the production and circulation of images depicting a pale-skinned Christ. And crucially, they claim he ordered the destruction of any conflicting evidence art, texts showing a Nubian Messiah.
A coordinated effort from the top down. And the visual arts then became a key tool.
Absolutely. The perfect way to spread and enforce the image. They specifically call out Renaissance artists like Michelangelo in the 16th century.
Michelangelo, how?
They claim artists like him were commissioned to create these incredibly influential works Singfin. The Pieta, for example, specifically designed to promote a Caucasian Jesus. They even allege these artists deliberately distorted the features of Mary, removing what they call her Nubian features to fit the white narrative.
Wow. So legislation, art, anything else?
Yes, they even suggest military campaigns played a role. The Crusades.
The Crusades, how do they fit in?
Spanning the 11th to 13th centuries.
Right.
The force suggests they had a dual purpose. Yes, military conquest, but also the systematic destruction of any physical proof, artifacts, scrolls, artworks in the conquered lands that pointed to a Nubian Jesus.
Destroying evidence while simultaneously spreading the preferred image.
Precisely. Circulating those pictures of a white Jesus Christ throughout the newly conquered regions to aid conversion and lock in that racial narrative.
So what's the end result of all this, the modern consequence, according to the source?
They connect this whole historical process and the resulting imagery directly back to the book of Revelation. They actually call the common, accepted white image of Christ the image of the beast.
The image of the beast from Revelation 13.
Yes, they assert this image was deliberately created and propagated by, quote, pale Jews, Jebusites of Canaan, linking back to their origin theories as a tool for white supremacy.
A tool designed to do what?
To confuse and oppress dark-skinned people, essentially, by making them worship an image that directly contradicts, in their view, the true biblical description and reality.
Okay. So We've gone pretty deep into this. Very challenging, definitely unconventional, and highly specific theological source material. What's the main takeaway here?
I think the absolute core thesis is this. Relying on modern English translations and just accepting the standard Christian iconography, the familiar pictures, has completely hidden the factual, historical, and racial reality described in the scriptures, according to this source.
Right.
We've covered some really radical claims about Adam, the patriarchs, Yahshua himself, all grounded in their unique deep dive into the original languages.
So the source is basically throwing down a gauntlet to you, the listener, asking you to look past tradition, maybe question the translations you've always heard, and examine the original languages, the historical context for yourself.
Yeah, and to really reconsider centuries of visual representation. What are you actually seeing? What are you worshiping?
Which leads us perfectly into our final provocative thought. And again, this comes only from the source material we analyzed today.
Right. If the source is correct, and its constant emphasis based on Exodus 20, verse 4, that making graven images or any likeness of anything in heaven or on earth is strictly forbidden.
The second commandment.
Exactly. And if F, as they claim, the popular image of Christ today is not just inaccurate, but a deliberate, even demonic deception,
Then what?
well, then it leaves you, the listener, with a really profound theological challenge. A challenge about the validity of the very act and the very object of much modern worship.